Welcome to the Black Anarchist Podcast, a channel where critical thinkers come to learn and grow. Through pedagogical discussions, we challenge the status quo, conventional narratives, and present raw truth. I'm JC, author of Blame It on the Dress, The Manufacturing of Black Homophobia and Performative Masculinity. Today, we're going to discuss one of the most consequential government documents in American history, the 1965 Moynihan Report, officially titled The Negro Family, the Case for National Action. Before we dissect the report itself, let's talk about the man behind it. Daniel Patrick Moynihan wasn't just any government official. As Assistant Secretary of Labor under President Lyndon B. Johnson, Moynihan had significant influence on policy, but his career trajectory tells us much more. What makes Moynihan's report particularly insidious is that it came not from a conservative opponent of civil rights, but from a self-proclaimed liberal Democrat. This is crucial to understand. Some of the most damaging policies toward Black communities have come wrapped in the veneer of liberal concern. Moynihan's report's concern for Black families wasn't benevolent. It was paternalistic and rooted in the same white supremacist assumptions as more overtly racist policies. It's worth noting that Moynihan served in the Johnson administration, the same president who, despite signing civil rights legislation, allegedly remarked that he would have those N-words voting Democratic for the next 200 years. Johnson's crude political calculation revealed the cynicism behind what many consider landmark civil rights achievements. Moynihan's report emerged from this context, supposedly liberal policies designed not for genuine liberation, but for political control. Moynihan would later serve in the Nixon administration. Yes, the same Richard Nixon whose Southern strategy exploited racial anxieties for political gain, and whose White House tapes revealed deeply racist private conversations. The same Nixon who called Black people little Negro bastards in private recordings. And Moynihan was comfortable working alongside him. The question we need to ask is, was the Moynihan Report genuine social science, or was it politically motivated research designed to secure federal funding by exaggerating problems and pathologizing the Black community? Moynihan's central argument was that a tangle of pathology existed in Black communities, centered around the breakdown of the nuclear family structure. He claimed this matriarchal structure was a key driver of poverty, crime, and welfare dependency. Moynihan's report alleged that absent Black fathers and female-headed households created a cycle of poverty that required government intervention. He painted a picture of Black men abandoning their responsibilities en masse, leaving women to raise their children alone. One of the most invidious aspects of the Moynihan Report was its portrayal of Black men as emasculated, docile, and fundamentally inadequate as fathers and providers. This wasn't just bad research. It was a calculated attack on Black masculinity that reinforced white supremacist stereotypes dating back to slavery. Moynihan claimed that Black men had been stripped of their traditional masculine role by matriarchal Black women who supposedly dominated their households. He wrote that Black men suffered from a crushing burden of matriarchy that left them powerless, ineffectual, and unable to fulfill their roles as fathers. By framing Black men as docile and emasculated, Moynihan reinforced the racist notion that they were somehow less than men, passive victims unable to assert themselves in their own families. This depiction conveniently ignored how structural racism, police brutality, housing discrimination, and employment discrimination were the actual forces behind Black fathers' inability to support their families on equal terms with white men. This report portrayed Black fathers as willingly abandoning their responsibilities, suggesting a moral failure rather than acknowledging the impossible conditions created by systemic racism. Moynihan's depiction of inadequate Black fatherhood ignored the creative ways Black men maintain connection with their children despite structural barriers designed to separate families. Most offensively, Moynihan suggested that Black men needed to be saved by white intervention, restored to patriarchal dominance through government intervention. This infantilizing perspective denied Black men's agency and resilience in the face of oppression and reinforced the white savior complex that has plagued American policy for generations. Let's talk about methodology. Because when we examine how Moynihan gathered and interpreted his data, the flaws become glaring. First, Moynihan cherry-picked his statistics. He focused on rising rates of single motherhood while ignoring single white motherhood and increasing at similar rates during the same period. For example, he emphasized that 25% of Black families were headed by women, but deliberately downplayed that this meant 75% maintained two-parent households. Secondly, he relied heavily on correlation without establishing causation. Yes, there was poverty in many female-headed households, but Moynihan assumed the family structure caused the poverty rather than considering that poverty might force family separations. He failed to account how racial discrimination and hiring practices systemically denied Black men employment opportunities that could enable family stability. Third, his historical analysis was selective at best. He acknowledged slavery's destruction of Black families, but failed to recognize how economic conditions, housing discrimination, and employment discrimination were contemporary factors forcing family separations. Moynihan claimed Black families were deteriorating rapidly from the 1950s onward, but ignored how redlining, urban renewal projects, and discriminatory GI Bill implementation actively destabilized Black neighborhoods. Fourth, Moynihan's sample size and data collection methods were questionable. He overgeneralized from limited data sets and applied his conclusions to the entire Black population. His reliance on welfare statistics as representative of Black family life was fundamentally flawed, as these samples inherently overrepresented struggling families and excluded the vast middle class Black population. Fifth, Moynihan specifically claimed that Black male unemployment caused family breakdown, but his own data showed that in some cities with the highest Black male employment rates, female-headed households were also high, directly contradicting his central thesis. Six, he made the demonstrable false claim that Negro children without fathers flounder and fail. Yet contemporary studies by Black sociologists show that many children in female-headed households thrive when supported by extended family networks and community structures. Last, Moynihan claimed a direct causal link between family structure and juvenile delinquency, ignoring research showing that economic factors and neighborhood conditions were far stronger predictors of youth outcomes than family composition alone. Perhaps the most egregious omission in Moynihan's analysis was his failure to properly contextualize the Great Migration. Between 1916 and 1970, more than 6 million Black Americans fled the South for economic opportunities and to escape racial terrorism. This wasn't just Black men. Black women were often the pioneering migrants. Many Black women left the South first, establishing themselves in northern cities before sending for their families. They weren't abandoners, they were economic pioneers making incredible sacrifices for their families' futures. Isabel Wickerson's Pulitzer Prize-winning work, The Warmth of Other Suns, documents countless stories of women who migrated north, worked multiple jobs, and saved to bring their families later. Moynihan's report erased these women's agency and heroism. Moynihan's entire analysis operated from what scholars call the white gaze, evaluating Black family structures against a white middle-class nuclear family ideal that even many white families did not match. He failed to recognize the strength of extended kinship networks in Black communities. Grandmothers, aunts, uncles, and cousins, a non-blood family often form resilient support systems that Moynihan's narrow definition of family could not accommodate. By pathologizing these alternative family structures, Moynihan reinforced white supremacist notions of normal and deviant family arrangements. So why did Moynihan frame his report this way? Looking at the timing is relevant. The civil rights movement had just secured major legislative victories. White resistance was fierce. By focusing on supposed Black family pathology rather than ongoing structural racism, Moynihan provided a convenient excuse for white Americans to blame Black poverty on Black behavior. This report wasn't research. It was political cover that shifted responsibility from white supremacist systems onto Black families themselves. By exaggerating the crisis, Moynihan could justify federal intervention and funding not to address racism, but to fix Black families. His later work with Nixon suggested that these weren't just innocent methodological errors, but part of a conservative political project. The irony is that Moynihan's self-proclaimed liberal values did not prevent him from producing work that ultimately undermined the very communities he claimed to care about. This reveals a critical lesson. White liberalism without accountability to Black families can be just as harmful as overt conservatism. The Moynihan's legacy continues to harm Black communities today, over 50 years later. It cemented the stereotype of the absent Black father in American culture. It provided pseudo-scientific justification for punitive welfare policies. It shifted focus from structural racism to individual behavior. And perhaps most insidiously, it made many Black Americans internalize these harmful narratives about their own communities. This report's portrayal of Black men as emasculated, docile, and ineffective fathers continues to haunt cultural representatives of Black fatherhood. It helped establish a persistent stereotype that Black men are inherently poor parents, a stereotype that persists in media, policy discussions, and even in a child welfare system, where Black fathers are often presumed incompetent before they've even been evaluated. Modern research thoroughly debunks Moynihan's core claims. Centers for Disease Control data shows that Black fathers are actually more involved with their children than fathers of other racial groups and many key metrics, even when they don't live in the same household. Black fathers are more likely to bathe, dress, and read to their young children daily compared to white and Hispanic fathers, completely contradicting Moynihan's portrayal of disengaged Black fatherhood. Sociologist Karen Edin's reports shows that economic factors, not cultural values, are the primary drivers of family structure and changes across all racial groups. And critically, research shows that extended kinship networks and alternative family structures in Black communities have been sources of resilience, not pathology. The Moynihan's report wasn't just bad science. It was calculated propaganda that served specific political purposes. It diverted attention from structural racism, justified paternalistic policies, and reinforced harmful stereotypes that persist today. By understanding the report's flaw, and the context of its creation, we can begin to dismantle its harmful legacy and recognize the true strength and resilience of Black families in America. I'll be including full citations for all the research and sources mentioned in this video in the description below, so you can verify the information and continue on your own with your own learning on this topic. Thank you for listening to the Black Anarchist Podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. The struggle is real and the fight for liberation is far from over. Get sovereign or die trying.